Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Falmouth Cares Business Roundtable. I'm your host, Troy Clarkson, and we're very grateful that you've joined us again for another edition of this show where we share experiences from members of the Falmouth business community, government leaders, and just other folks in the community to try to help you go through the maze of federal and state assistance and just understanding how Falmouth is responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. This week, we are very grateful to once again have our Congressman Bill Keating on to join us to provide an update on the Paycheck Protection Program and other benefits that the federal government is working on. We have Paul McAdam, a representative of Falmouth's Rotary Club, which represents many business and charitable organizations in our community. And of course, as always, our regular panelists, Bill Zammer, owner of the Flying Bridge Restaurant, Gary Vacon, and Michael Kasparian from the Falmouth Chamber of Commerce. So let's get right to it. We're going to shake things up a little bit this week because there's so many developments in terms of testing and information and updates on how COVID is impacting us on a local and a regional level. We're going to ask Gary to go first this week and to provide an update on statistics and testing and numbers of cases in our area and in Massachusetts in general. So Gary, thank you so much for your continued participation, your scholarly work. You're putting in a lot of hours when we're not on the air here, and we really appreciate everything you're bringing to this show every week.
Thanks, Troy. Okay, I'm going to do the usual thing, and let me put up the slide. Here we go. Tell me if you see this. You do, right? Disclaimers?
See it, yeah.
Okay, very good. So this is data as of yesterday, the 26th. Usual sources. Again, I want to point out that the data is based on limited sample sizes. In the US, we've tested 1.66% of the population. Massachusetts, we're doing quite a bit better, but still only 3.42% of the population. And it's not a random sample, so statistical inference is a suspect. So forecast uncertainty remains high. I want to show you next the corona growth factor, which we've shown from week to week. You know, as we go down to 1, that's a good thing. And that is going down to 1. But again, remember, this is based on limited test data. But it's still better that this thing is going downhill than uphill. And so let's keep going here. Here's the Massachusetts daily cases as of yesterday. And below it is the testing volume. And you notice how the testing volume and the cases kind of follow each other. You know, there may be a little bit of a downhill here, but it looked that way last week too. We need a longer trend to really have something that we can hang our hats on here. Again, though, it's not growing fast, which is also, you know, it's better than the alternative, and that's a good sign. The next thing that we've always done is we've shown you the University of Washington model data. The guy that runs that is a guy named Chris Murray, and Chris, as I've gotten to study his work, has become a personal hero in this. He's chair and professor of health metric sciences and director of the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation at the University of Washington. And if you really want to geek out on how his model works, the pointer I have up above, the link up above, is a great 45-minute video on their work. One thing that's really interesting when you look at how they do their work is, since they feel that the testing data is so slim, sparse, and untrustworthy because of the way we're doing it, they actually built their models kind of in reverse. They looked at hospitalizations and deaths and worked backwards. And their models are working pretty well, at least for predicting peaks. You know, this is Massachusetts now, according to their model. And, you know, this is the death rate, and the death rate, of course, bounces up and down, but it's kind of, on average, if you blur your eyes, it's kind of following their little dotted line. They're projecting that if with containment strategies, testing, contact tracing, isolation, and limiting gathering size, that you could start to relax social distancing on June 10th now. They said June 8th a week ago. I mean, it's kind of in the noise at this point, but that's what they're saying. And in terms of hospitalizations in hospital utilization in Massachusetts, we're still, you know, well under the purple line, which is good. We're using kind of half the beds that we've got, round numbers, and their model has been tracking very well. but you can see the uncertainty in the model, which is this area here. But this is kind of where we are, and this is kind of their average. So, and if you look at this hospitalization and you look at the actual Massachusetts data, it's tracking pretty well. We're using, close to 4,000 beds, and it's been kind of flat for a while. So it doesn't seem, at least for the near term, that we've exceeded, our capacity here, and that's really actually good news. But I want to do something a little different this week and start talking a little bit more about reopening and the concept of managing the risk. And I know that, well, I'll just make it clear. This is an open plea for more testing. And let me make the argument. Here's the question. Would you consider this car safe to drive? Let's say that I gave you a car, and the way the car worked is when you press the gas pedal, you waited 30 seconds, and the car started to accelerate. Similarly, when you press the brake pedal, you waited 30 seconds, and then the car stops. I submit that I probably couldn't get that car out of my driveway without hitting something. So now let's talk about, how's this look relative to the disease and COVID? Well, control system theory, you take an action, then you wait, and you do a measurement, and then you adjust your action. If kind of a worst case view of how that might work is we could get the cases to taper, relax social distancing, then we have to wait for another testing interval, and then start to notice that we're trending up, and then do social distancing again, and then keep going up and down this curve. We obviously would not like this to happen. How could we ensure or reduce the probability this happens? Well, let's talk about how we're testing today. This top line is kind of how we're testing today. The day you get infected, if you're asymptomatic, you get to stay out in society, and you may spread the disease via social contacts. If you have mild symptoms, you still may stay out in society. If you get sick enough, you'll contact your doctor. If your doctor thinks that this is not a COVID profile you have, you won't be submitted to testing because we have so few tests. If otherwise, you'll get submitted to testing, and then you get test results. If they're negative, fine. If they're possible, you may recover. Positive, you may end up in a hospital, and then things could get worse. What if the testing could occur up front? What if we could test even people that weren't showing symptoms? We could know who's disease-free, and we could know early. We could quarantine even people who are asymptomatic right away. And people could still go down this line if things went badly, but this would take this delay out. And therefore, the possibility of having this control system problem where you're going up and down this curve is diminished. So obviously increasing the testing availability and the length of time it takes us to test, and having enough test kits that we could actually test healthy people would make a huge difference in terms of the probability that we'd have a resurgence as we try to reopen. And, resurgences have happened before. This is the 1918 virus. And you can see in different parts of the country, there were multiple hills there. We'd like to have only one hill. We'd like to go down the hill and be done. And, I just want to kind of finish this little pitch with, a bet that we can't do this is a bet against the human race. And boy, betting against that throughout history has been a losing bet. So that's what I've got for today. I know it's a little different, but I wanted to talk a little bit about testing and what an impact it could make.
Well, thank you very much for that, Gary. And again, thanks for your continued work. It's really important to put the social distancing and the reason for continued isolation in some cases in perspective. And so, Congressman, we'll turn it directly to you. And again, we really thank you for taking the time. We've gotten a lot of feedback that it's been very valuable to have the ability to get these direct updates on what's happening in Washington. And so I think the position that Gary clearly took is that we see a direct economic link between increased testing and the ability to, for some people, to return to the economy and to start to provide some stimulus there. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's important, Troy, that you had Gary on first and that he did that, because actually that's the order that we're going to have to follow in order to move out of this successfully. And, there's no specific calendar date ahead of time. You have to look at that graph and you have to look at what's happening, then make your decisions based off of that. And the fact that ultimately, until there's a vaccine, testing and testing and testing are the three biggest words that we can, go forward with. And as part of that, I'd like to report, since the last time we talked, that we had what we called an interim, stimulus act, or it's actually a survival package, I think, to the American public and to small business as well. I find it amazing with saying that something that's almost $500 billion is interim, but that's where we're at right now. And we worked hard in the House to make sure that it dealt with just more than replicating what was done before in the last package, $250 billion to small business with the PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program, going forward. That was the initial effort that the President and the Senate wanted to go. And in the House, we said, wait a second here. We have to change the direction a little bit about this program, because we're hearing from smaller businesses that aren't having a chance, even though there's been great lending institutions here in Cape Cod that are trying to take all comers. So much of the money went because of pre-existing relationships with these giant banks and their customers. And we tried to change the direction of that a little bit. So we dedicated $60 billion to medium and smaller lending institutions to try and see if it could go in that direction. Now, we know with the PPP program how popular it was, and we also know there's many still in the line for action. People that have put in their applications before, they should double check to make sure their applications are in order, because they should be, but make sure. And then that could still be there, because I think so much of what's coming out is going to be for the things that are already in line. For the people that haven't put in your applications, put them in immediately, because it's first come, first serve. And we realize this is going to run out too, and there will be another package down the road. But in terms of testing, besides making sure that we put in $75 billion to rescue our hospitals, to make sure those frontline courageous people we have, nurses, doctors, clinicians, people working day to day in the hospital, make sure they have the protective equipment, the money for that, but also make sure the hospitals are functioning, because they're losing revenues on not taking elective surgeries and so many other things. They were hemorrhaging. So we made sure $75 billion was included in this package for hospitals and healthcare protection, as well as, and this is important, it's what Gary talked about, $25 billion for testing, $11 billion going right to the states, because that was what's the most overlooked portion of this package, but might be one of the most important things to look at. We have to get to that point. And if we don't, we're going to move out of this and take a tremendous risk that it spikes up again, and we'll be in worse shape health-wise and economically. So the testing component of this was important, as well as some of the research that's being done. There's research not only in tests that are very accessible, but also relatively inexpensive and rapidly giving answers and readings, but also making sure that there's antibody testing as well, because when there's no symptoms, you can go back and find out who had it and it wasn't reported. So the testing component will really be the pathway forward. But it's great to see so much work being done locally, not only in Falmouth with some of the people you're going to have on today and what they're doing for the community, but also throughout the Cape region. In discussions with Cape Cod Chamber this morning, and I know Bill Zammer is going to address this, we're trying to make plans. We can plan at this stage. Even though we can't move forward, we can be using this time to make a plan and to use American ingenuity and all the wealth of knowledge that so many small businesses have in the Cape area, and share information as to what tactics can be used going forward to keep people safe, but also get the business community moving. And I was encouraged to see that kind of discussion going on about how, not just when, but when that time comes and that graph goes lower, how we're going to approach this. And I think that if we do that successfully, we'll really lessen the risk going forward. So both at the local level, it's great to see what planning is going on the private and public side, what kind of research is going on. And in the meantime, that infusion of necessary survival funding that we voted on last week when I went down to Washington, making sure that was there.
Excellent. Well, that's great, and we really appreciate that overview and concur, obviously, that testing is paramount right now to getting the economy chugging along again. One of the questions that's emerged from several of our viewers, and we know that Bill himself has dealt with this as someone who has applied for it and received benefit from the PPP, is the whole issue of the seasonality of the economy here, and the PPP's silence, or really its lack of attention to seasonal businesses. So it's created some confusion, and I think some in this seasonal economy are concerned with their ability to comply with some of the rules of the PPP. And so, have there been any conversations, Congressman, about long-term in terms of compliance, or given the changing circumstances of the seasonal businesses here, how they will be viewed in terms of future compliance from the federal government in terms of loan forgiveness?
I think number one, and Bill knows this, but there's an 8-week period that was there, and all it meant was for the actually requirement to have this loan turn into a grant, which is free money, having your employees in place. There was some confusion among many people we heard of that they didn't realize it's just 8 weeks anytime within that period. But number two, on more of the seasonality approach, there's also discussion on the next package, trying to build an even greater calendar flexibility with some of the plans. And that's what we're talking about here. It's hard because you're trying to put this money out, and it's the United States, and it's so different in every aspect of the United States. There was a rush to get everything out as quickly as possible because the economists told us that every couple of weeks we delay. For instance, if we put forward assistance of $3, even a delay of a couple of weeks could mean that means $4. So the swiftness where we get that out to people is critical. But the flexibility, we're having discussions to see if it can become even more flexible. And this couldn't come at a worse time in our region. This is the time where we're ready to make profits.
Right.
So much of the late fall, winter, early spring, businesses aren't necessarily making money. Some are open, some aren't, but the ones that are there are maybe keeping their head above water or worse. And they need those summer seasons and the shoulder seasons to make the money. And as much as it was beneficial, this didn't happen in the middle of August, for instance, when there were so many people traveling from all over the country to get here, and the population skyrocketing that way. From a healthcare perspective, it was good it didn't happen at that time. But from a business perspective, it couldn't have happened at a worse time.
Right. So let's open it up to our panel here. Michael, I know you have some questions about how the chambers are continued to be impacted. And Bill, you have lots of thoughts on this issue as it relates to how we might emulate other states and some of the political issues. So we'll go to Michael first, and then to you, Bill Zammer.
Sure. Thank you, Troy. Well, I was encouraged in speaking with the Congressman earlier, because one of the things that we were challenged by is the chambers of commerce and associations were left out of the PPP. But I'm encouraged to hear the Congress is talking about that, and hopefully some of those dollars are going to flow. We're in regular communication with the Cape Cod Chamber as well, formulating our own plan. Wendy's doing an amazing job there. And each one of our communities that have these small local chambers are also working on those plans. Here in Falmouth, we've convened an ad hoc committee to do just what you had mentioned, Congressman, which is to kind of take that vision of what's going to happen next. How do we send that message out that we are practicing best practices? We feel as though, because most of our businesses are small businesses that are locally owned, locally operated, they can be nimble, flexible, and that we can come up with some really good ideas. That also leads into other discussions we have on, how can we maximize that profitability once businesses are allowed to reopen, and back to those seasonal businesses in particular, where they have a specific amount of time. So a lot of thinking outside of the box. We have a lot of members. We've assembled a panel of chamber members that includes restaurateurs, retail, accommodations. We've included the historic destinations and the arts and culture, as well as other chamber members to kind of talk just about those things. But I think that, as we move forward, the closer we get to this reopening, I think Falmouth, because of just what you talked about, people coming together on a local level and working hard locally, we're going to be in a good place, and we are going to be prepared to be able to open up safely and to be able to accommodate those people who come here. And we're working, all the chambers are working together to try to make that happen. And then once we are open for the summer season, whenever that will be, is to attract people here so that, the limited amount of money that's going to be spent this season will be spent in Falmouth.
All right.
I think it's important too.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, I think it's important too. The Cape in this region can do things that, for instance, some of the more urban areas can't. That can be a real advantage, actually. We don't have public transportation. They have challenges that we don't here. And we can do things here, I think, that that'll benefit the ability to open safely by looking at each community to community, each region, and saying, this will work here. Now, it may not work somewhere else. And I hope as we open up, there's a lot of flexibility to recognize that.
Bill, that brings me to my question. What state do you think is doing a good job in opening? A bunch of them are opening now. I hate to put you on the spot, but who do you think is doing the right thing?
Well, I think the sparsely populated states have a great advantage.
Yeah.
I really, it's too early to say that. The one thing I would say is there's some that are having tattoo parlors and they shouldn't be doing that now.
Okay.
And so it's easier to say at this stage who shouldn't be doing what. But I think we're in a good course here. I think the governor is going to address some of the issues very shortly. I think he's going to give some guidance about what are the new norms, at least for a temporary period, going forward. So it's going to take some discipline among people. But, most rules, as when I was DA, most laws are self-enforcing. Most rules are self-enforcing. And if we have some good guidance and community cooperation, we're going to be successful doing it. If we want to do things like curb, the rush time in certain retail areas, for instance, maybe there's something we could do, that we did years ago, where odd plates and your license plate, even plates for certain rush hour periods, just keep the population down. We could do some things here, and it's great to see that's being discussed at the community level, at the Falmouth level, and the Cape as a whole, because that cooperation is important. If you have some business that starts out and it's someone else in the same industry, and they start moving in a direction, you're being responsible, they're not, and they're somehow benefiting profit-wise from that. So it's going to be a community working together more than we've ever seen, I think, before. But what we're seeing now in Falmouth is an indication that that's already happening.
My next door neighbor from New York arrived last night. Should I tell him to go home?
Oh, I don't know.
You can tell him after 14 days he can get takeout at the Flying Bridge.
There you go, right?
We're going to take out next week.
Well,
Go ahead.
in kidding aside, Bill, Zammer, I think that's an important point. So we had talked before the show started, and you and your team are figuring out how to transition, and you're looking at takeout next week. And then we talked about what that might look like. And folks, because you're on the harbor and there's a wide open space there, people using responsible social distancing to eat, and people already congregating in those areas. So, Bill, what is it?
My wife
to you to try to figure all this out.
We're going to do takeout starting next week at the restaurants. My wife decided it'd be a great idea to put tables out in the parking lot. So if someone got takeout, wanted to sit out in the parking lot table, I can't stop them. So they'll have the enjoyment of the harbor and still be socially distances. But I don't know if we're going to do that or not. We'll figure that one out. So,
but I think that
to try and do something.
Sure. Well, but that's the kind of innovation that we're talking about, that we've been talking about on this show for several weeks now, and what we're really encouraging people who watch to share ideas and to call their local representatives to enable things like that. And what are you seeing, Congressman, throughout the district in terms of that sort of innovation? And Gary and I wrote a piece last week, and we emulated a worldwide column called the hammer and the dance, meaning the hammer is the social distancing and keeping inside, but the dance is really what we're going to experience until a vaccine is found, and that is, how do we responsibly reopen so that we can stimulate the economy but respect, above all, public health, and really honor the pandemic so that it minimizes its impact.
Well, first of all, let's go back to the way we began this program. Testing, first of all, and the availability of that testing. And then, just talking to Wendy, today, there's discussions, well, maybe some of the local communities will allow tents out in, areas that these businesses own.
My battery's dead. I need to plug my computer in.
All right. You ready, Bill? All right.
That's right. I muted him.
See, it's hard to get a word in otherwise. Here's but maybe, with permission, they can extend tents for some of these places so that they can space it out appropriately and just change for the interim period how they do business if they're given that flexibility. But that's one of the things that's mentioned, because people will say, well, how can you space out in a facility that's, well, maybe they have enough property so that they could put a tent for this period, this emergency period up there, so that they can have the spacing necessary and still do it. Those are the kind of discussions that's going on. And I've got to tell you, the people that are in the businesses themselves and can figure out, I could do this and still maybe at least break even for the time being. That's where you get the wisdom. So I think it has to percolate up in terms of how to do this the best way, because and incorporate as much flexibility if it makes sense in going into it. It's not going to be easy, because I think there's always the government always has an approach. Well, these are going to be the rules, and I'm sorry if it doesn't make sense for you, but it makes sense for a lot of other people. Hopefully, there's some flexibility. And I think that's the kind of thing maybe the governor's talking about.
You want to go to meet, Troy?
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry. I was trying to talk, but I muted my microphone. But sorry. But those are great points, Congressman. And you're right. It does have to percolate from the businesses up. And the space thing becomes really important. Like to Bill's point, putting tables out. He's got the space on the harbor. But we've had other businesses come forward and say, look, I've got space. I've got some of the accommodations. Say that maybe a couple of restaurants can set their tables up here and we can work something out. So exactly to your point. And then of course we got to look to the local government to relax some of the rules. Obviously the health department has to get involved, but everybody's got to work together, and those discussions are happening. And you're right. The spirit of entrepreneurship, these self-employed folks are coming forward with these great ideas. And we have to get together and support them to find that solution that works for everybody. So good to hear.
Yeah, we found out that during 2008 and 2009, one of the biggest obstacles was back then that the businesses lost their employees and they lost their basic core. And when it was time to start up again, that was lost. That's why we've put so much of this money out, like the PPP program or the emergency disaster loan money. That's why we put those programs in place, to try and keep the employees connected with their businesses, keep everyone going forward. Because when we move out of this, we don't want to waste several weeks because you have to go recruit employees, train employees, move forward. If that's in place, we have control of that once it becomes safer. If that's in place, that's going to make a huge difference, not only to that business, to that employee, but also to our overall economy.
Good point.
I know, Bill, you're really on the front lines of that challenge and making sure that when you decide to gradually reopen, you have the staff and the team in place to do that. What does that look like for you right now?
Right, I'm involved with more than just restaurants. I'm also involved with some retail shops that I own. But it's really fascinating because what we've been doing for the last couple of days now is planning for opening. For example, we're talking about having the gloves available, having the masks available, having the thermometers ready to measure temperature as people come into the door. Looking at how we're going where we're going to get the supplies for the Lysol wipes all over the place, and having one person, for example, in each of my locations constantly just cleaning. And how we are going to try and social distance. For example, the use of in the restaurants, paper menus, in my boutiques. How do you handle clothes when ones that come in and I own some boutiques? How do they handle the clothes when they have to try them on. And that's going to be extremely difficult, as you can imagine, or if someone's returning something. So all these things you got to think about ahead of time, but now's the time to do the thinking. Because as the Congressman points out, this 8-week period for me started ticking. I think they dropped the money Friday in my account, which means I have 8 weeks to begin complying with the forgiveness portion of all this. All my employees are working right now for me. They're sitting at home, but they're being paid, which is, they want to work, by the way, all of them. They do much better at work from the gratuities and also sales at the shops. So planning right now, I think, is extremely important in getting all these things ready in your mind. It sounds strange, but it's a new abnormal world. That's the only way you can describe it. And I applaud the Congress for what they've done so far. I hope to God we keep politics out of this and move forward and worry about looking at what happened wrong later, because there are a lot of things that happened wrong, which is a lot of fault being placed. But let's keep that out of the picture for the time being. And again, Troy, I know you're going to thank the people around Falmouth have done so much. But again, thanks, Bill, for being on here. But if you have any questions of me, that's what I have to say.
Thank you so much, Bill. And you're right. I was remiss at the top of the show, and I'm sure everyone shares with me. And really, our most important message today is thanking the people on the front lines of this. I mean, we see stories on the news and posts on social media every day about just the incredible work that our nurses and healthcare workers and frontline public safety folks, police officers, firefighters, the dispatchers that help them get there, the grocery workers, that suit up and show up every day and put themselves in danger. And it's, what's that?
Deliveries people.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and we've seen, I call this almost the Dickensian time, because we see the best of times and the worst of times, but we have seen the best of humanity emerge throughout this, and people's ability to be grateful and to say thank you for all those that are making those incredible sacrifices really has been a bright spot in this very dark cloud. So I think
Congressman, I wish we could give them, let me jump in here. Those people need a payroll holiday of some sort, of some way of getting the money to them. They deserve to get extra money some way. If my employees were doing that, I'd be paying them double time right now, the supermarkets or whatever, or time and a half. And if there's some way that Congress, we gave the $600 to the unemployed, we should be giving $600 to people who are working. I wish you'd figure something like that. Really.
Well, it's interesting you said that, Bill, because that is being discussed. And
all right, way to go, Bill.
Yes, it's being discussed in both the House and the Senate. Senator Schumer from New York, where he's seeing this at the epicenter, has suggested this, and it's something that's being embraced by House members too. So in the next package that comes out, we are talking about doing just that, giving some kind of bonus to those people that are working so many hours, night and day, risking so much, giving them a bonus from this. And so we are actually discussing that, and I do think there's a very good chance that could happen.
I'm with you 100% on that.
That's great. And so many good ideas are coming from this this very difficult time, and we're really seeing people respond to that. And that's actually a good time to introduce Paul McAdam, because the Rotary's basic principle, as we know, is service above self. And so, Paul McAdam, you are the president-elect of the Rotary Club, and you've seen, I think, through the charitable work that your organization does, people really come together locally during this pandemic and fill in some of the gaps in service and really be helpful to the community.
We have, Troy, and at the same time, I've heard each of you talk about planning, and I know you realize by the people on this call today that it's time for leaders to lead, and all of you are doing exactly that, and I give you a great deal of credit for it. So thank you. Rotary is as you know, is an international organization comprising 1.2 million people in the world. But as we come into a more local environment, which obviously is Falmouth, we have 51 members. Well, that's not a huge organization in terms of the impact they've had on the community. It's significant. We've been here for over 120 years. We understand what it means to give. And one of the things that we want to do on a go-forward basis is make sure that organizations that are charitable are not missing places where they can be supportive of the problems in the community today. And those problems are magnified. The challenges are very different than they were a month ago. One of the things that we have had some initial conversations with people on and will continue to expand is being able to get together with other charities and partnering with them if in fact they find that there are places where they're not getting full advantage in taking care of the community. So that's the newest piece. And I heard you say more than once, planning. It's about communication for us, and it's about being able to set a platform so that we can talk with other charities, of which there are hundreds, as you know, Troy, in the area. So we're going to be looking at that in the next week. We have a planning meeting this week on it, but it's significant for us to maximize the exposure to partnerships in charities to make sure that we take care of the people in the community. So I think that's where we want to be. And we understand very well the importance of giving money on a regional basis. We just recently took an emergency fund and contributed a small but very important part, I hope, to the service center. And that was done on a first serve, first come, first serve basis. So we see some positive opportunities right now too, because there are probably areas where all organizations have been doing things that maybe weren't as productive as they should be. And we now know we have to reinvent ourselves and help other charities do the same so we can do the right things in the community. So I compliment each one of you for doing what you're doing. And I must tell you that as a former New York president of an insurance company many years ago, this has some of the similar ringings of 9/11, but fortunately it's different in some positive ways, but it's also concerning to me that it's much more expansive. When I look at it here locally, I just think we need to rally more around the organizations that can be leaders. You represent that totally today. And I couldn't be more delighted that you've asked us to be a small part of this meeting today.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Paul. And thanks for all the work that you and Rotary do. And that's why we asked you on here to demonstrate that the nonprofit and charitable community is an important link in this chain of service that everyone's providing. And you know, it's interesting that you raised the issue of 9/11, because I think that's been on the minds of lots of people. One of the challenges about this pandemic is as catastrophic and tragic as 9/11 was, it occurred in one day. And the following day, we were in a recovery mode, whereas this pandemic is stretching out over weeks and months. So its impacts, I think, are spread out over a longer term. And so the economic impact as well, I think, in the long run could be more troubling. Congressman, just to take a point that Paul talked about and send it back to you, you know, we're seeing that it's really important that the Congress recognize the value of nonprofits in the CARES Act and provided relief to 501c3 and charitable organizations, because there are several here in Falmouth and on the Cape that have benefited from that. And so that things like providing help people that need a hand up and can get that, or people that need addiction treatment can get that. And so as you move forward to the next phases of whatever those new phases are, will there be continued assistance as well for nonprofits?
They'll continue on, and it's so important, Troy, you mentioned that they were included in the first place because it's so easy to overlook that. But they're often the glue that fill in the spaces that there are gaps in a community, and they do that. And I think that was recognized. What we have looking forward, what we're looking forward to finally getting to the stage is the recovery mode, because we even call this, CARES Interim Act, not even CARES 2, because we know the demand that's already there. Incidentally, it's a good point I didn't make in the beginning. If people are going to the different websites, they could get disappointed. Sometimes it's the real situation because there's such a backlog in some of the applications. But if there's any question, call our offices for some clarifications. Our offices are still open. Our Hyannis office is still open. in terms of communication. The doors are closed, but everyone's suited to do the same work they do in the office. They have the same resources, so please call with that. We've had people call and say, I don't qualify for this. And we found out that they indeed did qualify, or they're qualified for something else they didn't know. So it's important to take advantage of that resource that's there. We want to get to the stage of recovery. And one of the things we're planning right now is something that's been long neglected. And when we met as a Massachusetts delegation of congressmen last year with the Federal Reserve in Boston, and we said at the end of the meeting, if there's one business need that's necessary above all else, this is before the pandemic, they said it's infrastructure. So this is the time for us to coordinate the need to improve our infrastructure with a recovery bill. That wasn't done. I wasn't in office then, but that wasn't done the last time we had a recovery. And I think that was a big mistake. So when we move forward in one of the packages, whether it's this next one or the one after it, and talk about economic recovery needs, actually moving forward, stimulating the economy directly, I think you're going to see infrastructure as a centerpiece of that. And that'll be important. It'll be great to get to that day, but we'll be accomplishing two things at the same time: stimulating the economy, but also dealing with probably one of the number one economic issues that has been neglected for decades.
Excellent. And Gary, as a former Fortune 500 tech executive, I think, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but that infrastructure includes not just bridges and bricks and mortar, but things like high-speed internet access and things like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great point. And I just wanted to say to the Congressman, the $25 billion, I know that didn't, I know I'm off topic a little bit, but I know that didn't come easy. And I know certain people fought for it. And thank you for the testing.
No question. Gary and Michael, you've been out in the community. There is, as we know, we talk about every week, a charitable arm to our group that we call Falmouth Cares. And thanks to the generosity of Bill and Linda and Sam and Judy LaRusso, we have printed 1,000 T-shirts, and they are selling very, very well. We've sold over, I think it's over 400 or 500 to date. And as we know, all of the proceeds, I'm just going to switch to my Falmouth Cares background here. Bill, thanks for that.
There you go. You got to do that.
But so we've sold several hundred T-shirts, and all of the proceeds, thanks to the generosity of the Zammers and the LaRussos, are going to two local charities, the Falmouth Service Center and Belonging to Each Other, which, as we know, is a homeless prevention nonprofit that's led actually by our guest today, Paul McAdam. But Gary and Michael, as you've been out going throughout the town, hanging banners and sharing.
Gary purchased those banners, by the way. Put that in there.
Yes, the banners that Gary so generously purchased. It's just been a lot of good work by a lot of people. But what have you seen, I guess, as you've been out in the community? And because although the economy is a real challenge right now, and we're obviously in the midst of one of the most troubling times in our lifetimes, what I've witnessed is a real sense of hope out there. And Gary, just maybe share your sense of what you've seen as you've hung those banners.
Oh, it's absolutely true. And, and probably the most moving experience has been handing a banner to a manager of a local grocery store or farm stand and having them stand outside and take a picture of them holding that banner. And they look at me like,
Berkey. That's Jack. Bob Burke.
Yeah, they look, there's been multiple cases of this, and they look at me and they say, oh my God, you know what we're doing here. Somebody appreciates the fact. I mean, these people, they're feeding us. I mean, they're keeping us going. It really makes a difference.
And Michael, I'm sure you've seen that in your travels as well.
Oh man, it's been great. Most people, I think, like the Congressman said, it's brought out the best in a lot of people. I think most people do rally and they want to support their neighbors. I mean, Falmouth is just that kind of really special community, and the fact that, there's 2 degrees of separation here anyway, everybody knows everybody, but I agree. I think people have been really positive. I do see some fear in people. I notice sometimes you do see people who are scared, but I think it's comforting to know that other people are trying to, like, at least virtually put their arm around those people and let them know that there are people here to help. So, yeah, I mean, in the end, we're going to get through this together. That's the bottom line. And people have rallied. Those banners are everywhere. People are buying the T-shirts. The proceeds from the T-shirts are going to go to belong to each other and Falmouth Service Center. All good things, and it is encouraging. Everything we've talked about today is encouraging. I'm glad to hear, Congressman, that there's more funding coming, that Congress is looking for the stimulus. Actually, once we're in recovery, we're going to need that. But we'll look back on this, and there'll be a lot of things we'll have learned. And in some ways, I think it'll enhance our lifestyle. And I'm hoping really people are taking advantage of the time they do have, which I think a lot of people are, to spend time with the ones they love and kind of take some stock, reflect, and look at what's really important in their lives.
Hey, Bill, I'm curious, how are you communicating with Congress being up here in Massachusetts? How's that going?
Well, actually, it takes an enormous part of my day.
I can imagine.
Right now, as we're speaking, I'm going to jump on, but we do conference calls, and I have, in the course of a day, 6 or 7 hours some days of conference calls. So you choose which ones to work with. You work with your committees that you're working with. You work with coalitions. You work with your own party leadership to try and share information. We bring in experts. We've brought in some of the best healthcare experts and economic experts in the country, and they're sharing their information with us. So it's not happening the way it would as we all get together. It was very odd going there last week. We were down there and we voted in small groupings. We had the masks on, and Congress comes together, and part of the beauty of it is you're all mingling together, exchanging ideas, doing your business on the floor, checking out who'd be supporting what. That's hard, and nothing can replicate actually doing that, but we're on the phone doing the best we can. It's not quite the same. It takes a lot longer in terms of time, but we are functioning every day, and that's important. I was just going to get into one comment before about how we've changed and how individuals will change. I'd just like to ask all of you, when you started going around wearing a mask, I was self-conscious and felt a little awkward, and now I feel, as I have the mask and I see someone else with it on, I feel like a little camaraderie or togetherness doing that. Does anyone else experience that change? That, all of a sudden we're in it together?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think losing you guys. I've got to jump off, but thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Congressman, thank you so very much. We appreciate it. We'll see you again soon. And I think we'll finish up in a couple of minutes here, but I think we can go around the circle and talk about what the Congressman just said, because I think what he was describing was the same solidarity, Michael, that you were describing a couple of minutes ago, and the fact that we're all in this together. And so when we go out to the grocery store and we maybe take a little more time and we're a little more patient in allowing the person that's in the aisle to make their purchase, or we're a little bit more willing to maybe let somebody go at the crosswalk, and that fits in with what Bill was just saying about the masks, that we realize that we're all in this together. And I hope one of the things that comes out of this is that we collectively, as not only Falmouthites but as Americans, take a little bit of a deep breath and don't take so much for granted.
Troy, I couldn't compliment you more for doing the program for Falmouth Cares. And I think it goes deeper than a lot of people might realize. It gives people energy and a positive focus and just a perspective that I am sure 90% of communities in the country don't project. And I don't think you can ever comprehend and calculate that exactly. But positive energy is very important at this stage. And I compliment you for putting those out. If there's any need for volunteers in any organizations I'm involved with, we will be happy, Gary, to help you put out those banners.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so very much. And
Troy, I wonder if we could figure a way of getting some questions from the audience that they may want to send in somehow. Is there a mechanism for that?
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked about that on earlier shows, and Michael has actually provided an email address at the chamber where people can email. Would they prefer that they use the info, Michael, or email you directly?
Probably emailing me directly makes the most sense. Just send it to me to mkasparian@falmouthchamber.com. If you do have a question that you want on the show, please indicate that, because we get a ton of email every day. Yeah, people do send out some ideas and all, but yeah, just let us know if that's what you want, and we'd be happy to, read your question online and answer it.
I think that's a great idea, Bill, and people can email me directly as well. That's TBGC, my initials, 71@gmail.com. Happy to forward those right on to our group. For the folks watching, we do convene a little before the show just to strategize and to talk about what we're going to talk about. So we'd be happy to get your input. And it really, we've got a waiting list now of people that want to come on the show and talk. And so we will continue to do these shows on a weekly basis until really things have subsided to the fact that, to the point where we don't find that sharing the information weekly is necessary. So in the coming weeks, we will have additional business people, retailers from throughout the Falmouth community. Next week, we'll be joined by Bill Huff, the publisher of The Enterprise, who is a small business owner, but also we'll talk about how he's dealing with sharing the news of this pandemic. And Representative David Vieira has graciously agreed to come on a future show. So if you have any ideas about people you'd like to see or a perspective you'd like to hear from, we would welcome any and all folks. We're here and we spend the time to put the show together so we really can share valuable information with all of you. So, Bill, thank you for bringing that up.
Yep.
Is there anything else that anyone here has before we close another very valuable show?
Yeah, I'd like to just kind of throw in there too, to that point that you were talking about. So all that information we've been talking about, the information the Congressman was talking about, it's all readily available in one place, right on the Falmouth Chamber of Commerce website, www.falmouthchamber.com. It's worked, Maura and Susan have worked diligently around the clock, updating that information. It's really put in a format that is easy to follow. This show is on there. Other videos are on there. So I'm trying to create that like one go-to place for any of that information. And we're working remotely and all, but any questions at all, you can field them through to the chamber. We're happy to help get you the answers, point you in the right direction.
Excellent. Thank you. And there are still, we've sold several hundred, but there are several hundred t-shirts left. So
That's right.
Log on to bteofalmouth.com. That's the Belonging to Each Other website. And you can order them, and Bill's team at the Flying Bridge will get them mailed to you. So we have created a scenario of safe social distancing.
Or pick up a dozen at a time.
Bill,
Or pick up a dozen at a time. We do ask, when you get your t-shirt, if you would please take a picture of yourself and post it on social media with the hashtag Falmouth Cares. We're seeing lots of great activity and lots of chatter that really helping to support these two wonderful organizations. So
Pretty t-shirts.
they are.
Logos, just a heart and the obstacle light.
It's the logo that you see behind us on a wonderful light blue t-shirt. There you go, Michael.
T-shirt.
That's the front.
Oh, there you go. There you go. That's good.
Here's the back.
Wonderful.
Mikey. All right. Look at that. Wow.
Outstanding.
I got to get me one of those.
Outstanding.
Only $15 a donation. Is that how it works?
We know how to get you one or two of those. Not a problem.
Spend $15,000. We hope to
$15,000.
Only $15 a piece, and all of the proceeds go to benefit the service center and Belonging to Each Other. Thanks to the generosity of some of the folks on this call. So, Paul, we really appreciate all the work that you do with the Rotary Club and with Belonging to Each Other. We're very grateful to have had you on the show. Thank you very much. And obviously to our regular panelists, Bill Zammer, Gary Vacon, and Michael Kasparian, we appreciate your ongoing work on behalf of the community. So we will be back again next week, and we were here this week because Falmouth cares. Thanks to everyone.
Troy, you'll stay on for after recording?
Safe.
Troy,
Yes,
stay
sir.
on after recording.
and our hearts sang on. Was it the spell of our town, or an April dawn? Who knows if we shall meet again? But when the morning chimes ring sweet again, I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places that this heart of mine embraces all day through. In that small cafe, the park across the way, the children's carousel, the chestnut trees, the wishing well. I'll be seeing you in every lovely summer's day, in everything that's light and gay. I'll always think of you that way. I'll